I never thought a casual neighborhood barbecue would turn into a legal nightmare that would cost my homeowners association nearly $500,000. But here we are. My name is Cameron Garrett, and I had lived peacefully in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision in Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 years before everything went sideways. I worked as an IT consultant from home, which meant I spent a lot of time in my modest 2-story house on Willow Creek Drive. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and an HOA that I mostly ignored as long as I paid my dues on time. That all changed on a Tuesday morning in March when I found the first letter taped to my front door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia Henderson, the HOA president. Patricia was exactly what you would expect from someone who dedicated their entire existence to policing their neighbors. She was a woman in her early 50s with blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And she drove a white Mercedes SUV that she parked perfectly centered in her driveway every single time. The letter accused me of running an illegal business from my home, violating noise ordinances, and causing traffic disruptions in our quiet residential area. I read it 3 times, convinced there had been some mistake. I worked alone at my computer. The loudest thing in my house was probably my coffee maker, and traffic disruptions. I had one car that I drove maybe twice a day. I called the HOA office immediately, reaching Patricia's assistant, a timid woman named Sarah who always sounded like she was apologizing for existing. "Hi, Sarah. This is Cameron Garrett from 428 Willow Creek. I received this letter and I think there has been a major misunderstanding." "Oh, Mr. Garrett. Yes, Mrs. Henderson mentioned you might call. She is currently unavailable, but she said all the information is in the letter." "But none of this is accurate. I work from home as a consultant. I don't have clients coming to my house. I barely make any noise. What is this about?" Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I really cannot say more than what is in the letter, Mr. Garrett. You have the right to respond in writing or attend the next board meeting." The board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks away. I decided to wait it out, assuming this would blow over once I explained the situation in person. I was wrong. 3 days later, I ran into my neighbor Tom while checking my mail. Tom was a retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, and we had always been friendly, exchanging waves and occasional small talk about the weather or the Charlotte Hornets. "Hey, Cameron," Tom said, but his tone was different. Cooler. "Hey, Tom, how's it going?" He glanced around as if checking whether anyone was watching. "Look, I don't want to get involved in whatever is going on with you, but you should know people are talking." My stomach dropped. "Talking about what?" "Patricia has been telling people you are running some kind of shady online business, that you have people coming and going at all hours, that there have been complaints about noise and suspicious activity." He shifted his weight uncomfortably. "I'm just saying, as someone who has lived here longer, Patricia doesn't let things go." I felt my face flush with anger and confusion. "Tom, none of that is true. I work alone. I'm a legitimate IT consultant. This is insane." He held up his hands. "I'm not saying I believe it, man. I'm just telling you what's going around. Might want to get ahead of it." That conversation lit a fire under me. Patricia was not just sending me letters, she was actively spreading lies about me to our neighbors. I spent the next week documenting everything. I pulled my business licenses, my tax returns showing legitimate consulting income, my client contracts with their NDAs and official company letterheads. I even got a letter from my largest client, a financial services firm in downtown Charlotte, confirming that I worked remotely and never brought clients to my home. The night of the HOA board meeting, I walked into the community center with a folder full of documentation, ready to clear my name. About 30 residents were scattered around the room, which was more than usual. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all looking official and self-important. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the standard agenda items with the enthusiasm of someone reading assembly instructions. Then she got to new business. "We have a matter concerning a resident at 428 Willow Creek Drive," she announced, not even looking at me. "There have been multiple complaints about commercial activity being conducted from this residence in violation of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions." I raised my hand. "I would like to address that." Patricia's smile was thin and sharp. "You will have your opportunity during the resident comment period." She then proceeded to spend 15 minutes detailing complaints that were supposedly filed against me. According to her, neighbors had reported constant traffic, noise at inappropriate hours, multiple vehicles parked on the street, and concerns about the nature of my business activities. She made it sound like I was running a drug operation. Finally, she allowed me to speak. I walked to the front with my folder, my hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. "Thank you for the opportunity to address these accusations, which are completely false." I opened my folder and began laying out my documentation. "I am a licensed IT consultant. Here is my business license, issued by the state of North Carolina. Here are my last 2 years of tax returns showing legitimate consulting income. Here are contracts with my clients, all of whom are established businesses. I work alone from my home office. I do not have clients visit my residence. Everything I do is conducted via computer, phone, and video conference." I looked directly at Patricia. "I would like to know who filed these complaints because I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding." Patricia barely glanced at my documents. "We are not required to disclose the identity of residents who file complaints. That information is kept confidential to protect them from retaliation." "This isn't about retaliation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is about defending myself against false accusations. If someone has a legitimate complaint, I deserve to know what specifically I supposedly did wrong so I can address it." One of the other board members, an older man named Robert, cleared his throat. "The complaints were quite specific, Mr. Garrett. Multiple neighbors reported unusual activity." "Can you tell me what dates? What times? What specifically did they see?" Patricia cut in before Robert could respond. "We are not conducting a trial here, Mr. Garrett. The board has received complaints and we are investigating. In the meantime, you are on notice that any violations of our CCRs will result in fines." I felt my frustration boiling over. "How can I violate something I'm not even doing? You are accusing me of things that are not happening." "I suggest you review our covenants very carefully," Patricia said with that same brittle smile. "Now, if there are no other comments, we will move to the next agenda item." I returned to my seat, my folder of useless documentation clutched in my hand. Several neighbors avoided eye contact with me. This was worse than I had thought. After the meeting ended, I tried to approach Patricia, but she literally turned her back on me and walked out in conversation with another board member. I was standing there, feeling helpless and angry, when a woman I did not recognize approached me. "Mr. Garrett," she was probably in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. "I'm Dorothy Mills. I live over on Birch Street." "Hello," I said, still rattled. "I just want you to know that I don't believe what Patricia is saying. I have been to enough of these meetings to see how she operates. She has done this before to other residents who she decides she doesn't like." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" Dorothy glanced around to make sure no one was listening. 2 years ago, she went after a young couple who painted their front door a shade of blue she did not approve of. She made their lives miserable with fines and accusations until they finally repainted it. Last year, it was a man who had a vegetable garden in his backyard that she claimed violated some aesthetic rule. She is very good at finding ways to make people comply or make them so uncomfortable they leave. But why me? I barely interact with the HOA. I pay my dues. I keep my lawn mowed. Dorothy smiled sadly. With Patricia, it could be anything. Maybe she doesn't like that you work from home. Maybe someone said something and she decided to run with it. The why doesn't really matter to her. What matters is that she is in charge and everyone needs to know it. So what do I do? Document everything, Dorothy said. Every interaction, every letter, every accusation, and be careful. Patricia has a way of escalating things when people push back. I thanked Dorothy and walked back to my house, my mind racing. I had always thought HOAs were just annoying bureaucracies that sent you reminders about trash can placement. I never imagined I would be dealing with what amounted to a targeted harassment campaign. The next week, things got worse. I received 2 more letters, both with new accusations. One claimed I was storing commercial vehicles on my property, which was laughable since I only owned my personal sedan. The other accused me of modifying my home's exterior without approval. I had done no such thing. I called a friend who was a real estate attorney in Charlotte and asked for advice. "Cameron, this sounds like harassment," my friend Marcus said. "HOAs have authority, but they can't just make stuff up. Do you have proof these accusations are false?" "Of course I have proof." "They are not happening. How do I prove a negative?" That's the problem with these situations. The burden of proof should be on them, but HOAs often operate like little fiefdoms. My advice: start recording everything. If they send you letters, respond in writing and keep copies. If they fine you, document why the fine is unjust, and if it escalates, you might need to lawyer up for real. I took Marcus's advice seriously. I installed security cameras around my property, capturing my driveway, front yard, and side yard. I wanted video evidence that I was not doing any of the things Patricia claimed. I also started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with the HOA. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I received a letter informing me I was being fined $500 for operating a commercial business from my residence without board approval. The letter gave me 10 days to pay or the fine would increase. I was done playing nice. I wrote a detailed response, attaching all my previous documentation, clearly stating that I was not operating a commercial business in violation of any CCRs, and demanding that the HOA provide specific evidence of their claims. I sent it via certified mail so I would have proof of delivery. Patricia's response came a week later, and it was shockingly aggressive. She rejected my documentation, claimed the board had sufficient evidence of violations, and increased my fine to $750. The letter also stated that if I continued to refuse compliance, the HOA would place a lien on my property. That threat crossed a line. A lien on my property could affect my mortgage, my credit, my ability to sell my home. Over completely fabricated accusations, I called Marcus again. "They are threatening a lien, Marcus. Can they actually do that?" "Technically, yes, if you have unpaid fines. But those fines have to be legitimate." "Cameron, I think you need to consider legal action. This has moved beyond a simple dispute. They are threatening your property rights based on what you say are false claims." "What kind of legal action?" "Well, if they are spreading false information about you, that could be defamation. If they are targeting you unfairly, that could be harassment or a violation of their own governing documents. We would need to investigate, but you might have grounds for a lawsuit." The word lawsuit made my stomach twist. I was not a litigious person. I had never sued anyone in my life. But I also was not going to let Patricia Henderson destroy my reputation and threaten my home over lies. "Let me think about it," I told Marcus. Before I could make a decision, the situation took an even darker turn. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Jennifer, a woman I had gone on a few dates with about 6 months earlier. We had not worked out romantically, but had stayed friendly. "Cameron, I almost did not recognize you," Jennifer said, her smile warm. "Hey Jennifer, how have you been?" "Good, good. Hey, I heard something weird recently and I wanted to ask you about it directly because it seemed so unlike you." My heart sank. "What did you hear?" Jennifer's expression became more serious. "Someone told me you were involved in some kind of legal trouble, that you were under investigation for fraud or running a scam business from your house. I told them that could not be right, that you are one of the most honest people I know. But they seemed pretty convinced. What is going on?" I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The rumors had spread beyond my immediate neighborhood. Patricia's lies were affecting my reputation in the wider community. "Jennifer, none of that is true. My HOA president has been spreading false information about me. I'm a legitimate IT consultant. There is no investigation, no fraud, no scam. This is all coming from one person who has decided to target me for reasons I don't even understand." Jennifer looked genuinely concerned. "That is awful, Cameron. Who told me this?" "It was Brenda from my book club. Her sister lives in your neighborhood." "What exactly did Brenda say?" "She said her sister heard from the HOA president that you were running some shady online operation, that there had been complaints, and that the HOA was working with authorities to investigate." She made it sound really serious. Working with authorities. Patricia had escalated from neighborhood gossip to claiming law enforcement was involved. This was spiraling completely out of control. "Jennifer, I promise you, none of that is true, but thank you for telling me. This is really helpful to know how far this has spread." After my conversation with Jennifer, I went home and immediately called Marcus. I was ready to take legal action. This had gone from an annoying HOA dispute to a full-blown defamation campaign that was damaging my professional and personal reputation. Marcus referred me to a colleague, a litigator named Sarah Chen who specialized in HOA disputes and defamation cases. I met with Sarah in her office in downtown Charlotte 3 days later. Sarah was in her late 30s, sharply dressed, and had an intensity that immediately put me at ease. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. "Okay," Sarah said when I finished. "This is actually more clear-cut than many cases I see. You have documented false statements being made by a person in a position of authority. Those statements have been spread to third parties, and you have suffered harm to your reputation. That's textbook defamation. So I have a case, potentially a very strong one. But I need to do more investigation. I want to interview neighbors, get copies of everything the HOA has sent you, review your security camera footage, and see exactly what Patricia Henderson has been telling people. Defamation cases require proving that specific false statements were made and that they caused you measurable harm. What kind of harm are we talking about? Damage to your professional reputation could affect your ability to get clients. Damage to your personal reputation in your community. Emotional distress. If we can prove that her false statements were made with malice or reckless disregard for the truth, we might also be looking at punitive damages. How much would something like this cost? Sarah leaned back in her chair. I'm not going to lie to you, Cameron. Litigation is expensive. But in cases like this, if we win, the defendant typically has to pay your attorney fees. And honestly, from what you have told me, I think we have a good shot at winning. The question is whether you are prepared for what this process involves. It could take a year or more. It's going to be stressful. Patricia and the HOA will fight back. Are you ready for that? I thought about the last few months. The letters, the accusations, the public humiliation at the board meeting, the spreading rumors that were affecting my relationships and potentially my business. I thought about Patricia's smug face and her absolute certainty that she could say whatever she wanted without consequences. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Sarah smiled. Good, then let's get to work. The first step was gathering evidence. Sarah hired a private investigator to interview neighbors and document what Patricia had been saying. The results were even worse than I had feared. Over the course of 2 weeks, the investigator spoke with 15 residents in my neighborhood. 12 of them confirmed that Patricia had told them I was under investigation for illegal business activities. 8 said she had specifically mentioned fraud. 5 said she had told them that she was working with law enforcement. 3 said she had suggested I might be involved in something criminal that she could not discuss in detail, but that everyone should be careful around me. None of it was true. Not a single word. The investigator also documented that Patricia had made these statements at various HOA events, community gatherings, and in private conversations. She had been systematic and deliberate in spreading this false narrative about me. Sarah also subpoenaed all HOA records related to me, including complaints, board meeting minutes, and any correspondence. What we discovered was shocking. There were no complaints filed against me by neighbors. None. Every single accusation in Patricia's letters had been initiated by Patricia herself. She had invented the complaints out of thin air. In the board meeting minutes, Sarah found notes indicating that other board members had questioned Patricia's allegations. Robert, the older board member, had apparently asked for evidence of the complaints during a closed session. Patricia had shut him down, insisting she had verbal complaints from residents who wished to remain anonymous. But our investigation proved those complaints never existed. Cameron, this is actually better for our case than I expected, Sarah said during one of our meetings. She did not just spread false information. She manufactured an entire fictional scenario and then used her position of authority to legitimize it. This is malicious defamation. We can prove she knew or should have known her statements were false because there was no evidence to support them. So what happens next? Next, we file a lawsuit. We are going to sue Patricia Henderson personally and the HOA as an entity. Patricia for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The HOA because they allowed her to use their official capacity and resources to carry out this campaign. The lawsuit was filed in Mecklenburg County Superior Court in early June. We asked for actual damages of $100,000 for harm to my reputation and business, and punitive damages to be determined by a jury. We also asked for a court order requiring the HOA to issue a public retraction and correction of all false statements. The day Patricia was served with the lawsuit, my phone started ringing. First it was a blocked number that I did not answer. Then it was Sarah, calling to tell me that Patricia's attorney had already reached out, calling the lawsuit frivolous and threatening to counter-sue for abuse of process. That is standard defense attorney posturing, Sarah said. Don't let it rattle you, we have a solid case. But Patricia was not done fighting dirty. 2 days after being served, I received a letter from a different attorney representing the HOA. This letter informed me that I was being fined an additional $2,000 for bringing legal action against the HOA in violation of our CCRs, which supposedly required mediation before litigation. I forwarded the letter to Sarah, who actually laughed when she read it. This is incredible. They are retaliating against you for exercising your legal rights, and they are doing it in writing. They just gave us more evidence of malice. Sarah immediately filed a motion for injunctive relief, asking the court to order the HOA to stop taking any punitive action against me while the lawsuit was pending. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, word of the lawsuit spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The reaction was mixed. Some neighbors started being friendlier to me, apparently realizing that Patricia's accusations had been false. Others seemed to circle the wagons around Patricia, viewing me as someone causing trouble for the community. One evening, I found a note in my mailbox. It was handwritten, unsigned, and said, "Drop the lawsuit or you will regret it." I immediately gave it to Sarah, who gave it to the police. The police took a report, but said there was not much they could do about an anonymous threat without more information. The hearing for the injunction was my first time seeing Patricia since filing the lawsuit. She sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. She would not even glance in my direction. Sarah argued that the HOA was retaliating against me for exercising my First Amendment right to petition the courts. The HOA's attorney argued that I had violated the CCRs by not attempting mediation first. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, was not impressed with the HOA's position. "Counselor, you are asking this court to believe that your client can make false accusations against Mr. Garrett, threaten his property with liens, and spread damaging rumors about him. But he cannot seek legal recourse without first sitting down with the very people who have been attacking him." That strains credulity. The judge granted our motion, ordering the HOA to cease all punitive actions against me pending resolution of the case. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. As summer progressed, the discovery phase of the lawsuit began. This was where both sides exchanged documents, took depositions, and built their cases. Sarah deposed Patricia, and I was allowed to sit in and watch. Patricia's deposition was a masterclass in evasion and deflection. She claimed she had received verbal complaints from multiple neighbors, but could not remember specifically who or when. She insisted that everything she had said was based on legitimate concerns raised by the community. When confronted with the fact that our investigation found no neighbors who had actually filed complaints, she suggested that people were lying to protect me or were afraid of retaliation. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said at one point, her voice calm but pointed, "do you have any documentation of these alleged complaints? Any emails, any written notes, any records at all?" Patricia shifted in her seat. "We handle many complaints verbally. Not everything is documented. But you documented your letters to Mr. Garrett extensively. You kept records of alleged violations. Surely if neighbors were complaining, there would be some record." I responded appropriately to the information I had. "Information you cannot prove existed." Patricia's attorney objected, and the deposition continued in circles like that for hours. But it was clear that Patricia had no evidence to support her claims. We also deposed the other HOA board members. Robert, the older gentleman who had questioned Patricia, was surprisingly honest. He admitted that he had never seen any evidence of complaints against me. He said Patricia had insisted multiple times that she had spoken with concerned neighbors, but when he asked for specifics, she had always claimed confidentiality. "Did you believe her?" Sarah asked. Robert hesitated. "I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. She was the president. But looking back, I should have pushed harder for evidence. I failed Mr. Garrett by not questioning her more thoroughly." His honesty was refreshing, and it actually made me feel a bit better about the other board members. They had not been malicious, just passive in the face of Patricia's aggression. The HOA's defense strategy became clear as discovery continued. They were going to argue that Patricia honestly believed I was violating HOA rules, even if she was mistaken, and that her statements were protected as part of her duties as HOA president. They claimed that any harm to my reputation was the natural consequence of a legitimate HOA investigation. Sarah was confident this defense would fail. Honest mistakes are one thing, she explained, but Patricia made specific, detailed accusations that she had no basis for making. She told people you were under investigation by law enforcement. She told people you were committing fraud. Those are not statements someone makes by accident. Those are deliberate lies designed to harm your reputation. In September, the HOA's insurance company reached out to discuss settlement. They offered $50,000 for me to drop the lawsuit. Sarah and I discussed it seriously. $50,000 would cover my attorney fees and give me some compensation for what I had been through, but it felt like letting Patricia off easy. "What do you want, Cameron?" Sarah asked. "This is your decision." I thought about everything. The months of stress, the damage to my reputation, the neighbors who still looked at me with suspicion, the way Patricia had so confidently lied and expected no consequences. "I want to go to trial," I said. "I want a jury to hear what she did. I want a public record of her lies. I do not want her to be able to do this to someone else." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Then we go to trial." The trial was scheduled for February of the following year. As the date approached, I was a mess of nerves. Sarah assured me we had a strong case, but anything could happen in front of a jury. The trial lasted 5 days. The courthouse in downtown Charlotte was an imposing building, and walking through those doors each morning felt surreal. This was really happening. I was actually taking an HOA president to court over her lies. Sarah's opening statement was powerful. She laid out the timeline of events, the false accusations, the spreading rumors, and the complete lack of evidence to support anything Patricia had claimed. She painted a picture of a woman who had abused her position of authority to wage a personal vendetta against a neighbor who had done nothing wrong. The HOA's attorney tried to portray Patricia as a dedicated volunteer who had made judgment calls in good faith. He tried to suggest that I was overly sensitive and that HOA disputes happen all the time without resulting in lawsuits. Over the course of the trial, Sarah called multiple witnesses. Dorothy Mills, the kind woman who had warned me after the board meeting, testified about Patricia's pattern of targeting residents. Tom, my neighbor, reluctantly admitted that Patricia had told him I was involved in suspicious activities. Jennifer testified about hearing rumors that I was under investigation for fraud. The most damaging testimony came from the private investigator, who presented his findings in meticulous detail. He had documented 12 separate instances of Patricia making false statements about me to third parties. He had recordings of conversations where Patricia specifically said I was being investigated by authorities, despite that being completely false. When Patricia took the stand, Sarah cross-examined her methodically. Patricia tried to maintain that everything she had said was justified, but under questioning, she could not provide a single piece of evidence to support her accusations. She grew defensive and flustered, at one point snapping at Sarah in a way that made the jury visibly react. "Mrs. Henderson, yes or no, did you ever contact law enforcement about Mr. Garrett?" I discussed concerns with various officials. "That is not what I asked." Did you ever file a report or request an investigation from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department regarding Mr. Garrett? Patricia's face flushed. Not formally, no. So when you told residents that Mr. Garrett was under investigation by authorities, that was not true, was it? I believed there were concerns that warranted investigation. But you knew there was no actual investigation happening when you told people there was. Correct. I may have phrased things in a way that was misunderstood. You told at least 5 neighbors that Mr. Garrett was being investigated for fraud. That was a lie, was it not? Patricia's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury could see she was dodging the question because the answer was yes. I testified for half a day, walking the jury through the nightmare of the past year. I explained my legitimate business, showed them my security camera footage proving I was not running some kind of operation from my home, and talked about how Patricia's lies had affected my relationships and my sense of security in my own neighborhood. How did it feel when you learned that Mrs. Henderson had been telling people you were a criminal? Sarah asked. Devastating, I said honestly. I have worked hard to build a legitimate career and to be a good neighbor. To have someone in a position of authority systematically destroy my reputation with lies, it made me feel helpless and violated. I couldn't defend myself because how do you prove you are not doing something you never did in the first place? The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. Sarah tried to keep me busy and distracted, but I was checking my phone constantly, wondering if the call would come. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, we got word that the jury had reached a verdict. We rushed to the courthouse. My hands were shaking as we took our seats. Patricia sat across the aisle, her face pale and tight. The jury foreman stood. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict. We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Cameron Garrett versus Patricia Henderson and the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association on the count of defamation, how do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiff, Cameron Garrett. Relief flooded through me. Sarah squeezed my arm. The foreman continued. We award the plaintiff actual damages in the amount of $75,000 and punitive damages in the amount of $300,000. I actually gasped. $375,000 total. It was far more than I had expected. The judge then addressed the additional claims. The jury found in my favor on intentional infliction of emotional distress, adding another $25,000 to the judgment. The total came to $400,000. Patricia's face had gone from pale to gray. Her attorney was already whispering urgently to her. The HOA board members in attendance looked shell-shocked. After the verdict was read, the judge added her own comments. Mrs. Henderson, I want to be very clear. This jury found that you engaged in a malicious campaign of defamation against Mr. Garrett. You used your position of authority to spread false and damaging information about a neighbor who had done nothing wrong. This behavior is not only legally actionable, it is morally reprehensible. I hope this verdict sends a message that homeowners associations are not above the law and that their officers cannot abuse their power without consequences. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was ecstatic. That was an incredible verdict, Cameron. The jury saw right through her. $400,000. That is a serious statement. I felt numb, almost disconnected from reality. It was over. After a year of hell, it was finally over, and I had won. The aftermath of the trial was almost as dramatic as the trial itself. The $400,000 judgment against Patricia, and the HOA sent shockwaves through Meadowbrook Hills. The HOA's insurance covered part of the judgment, but there was a significant gap that the HOA had to cover through a special assessment on all homeowners. Patricia was forced to pay her portion personally, which I later heard required her to take out a second mortgage on her home. Within 2 weeks of the verdict, Patricia resigned as HOA president. The board issued a public statement apologizing to me and clarifying that I had never been under investigation, had never violated any HOA rules, and that the accusations against me had been completely unfounded. They sent the statement to every homeowner and posted it on the community website. Some neighbors approached me with apologies. Tom came over with a 6-pack of beer and said he felt terrible for believing Patricia's lies. Dorothy Mills gave me a hug and told me she was proud of me for standing up to Patricia. Others remained distant, probably embarrassed by their role in spreading the rumors or uncomfortable with the whole situation. The most gratifying moment came about a month after the trial. I was mowing my lawn when a car pulled up, and a woman I did not recognize stepped out. She was probably in her 30s, looking nervous. "Are you Cameron Garrett?" she asked. "I am. I'm Amanda. I live over in Riverside Estates, a few miles from here. I just wanted to thank you." I was confused. Thank me for what? Our HOA president has been doing something similar to what Patricia Henderson did to you. Making up violations, spreading rumors, targeting people she does not like. I read about your case in the Charlotte Observer, and it made me realize we are not crazy, that there are legal remedies. I talked to a lawyer and we are taking action against our HOA. I felt a strange sense of pride. I am glad I could help, even indirectly. No one should have to go through what I went through. That trial transcript is public record now. My attorney is using it as a roadmap for our case. You might have started a movement. Amanda smiled. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for fighting back. After she left, I stood in my yard thinking about that. A movement. I had never intended to be some kind of anti-HOA crusader. I just wanted to clear my name and stop Patricia from ruining my life. But if my case helped other people stand up to abusive HOA boards, maybe all the stress and expense had been worth it. Life slowly returned to normal. I continued my IT consulting work, which had actually picked up after the trial. Apparently, the publicity had given me a reputation as someone who stood up for himself and did not back down from bullies. Several potential clients mentioned the case during initial conversations, always in a positive light. The HOA elected a new board, including several members who ran on a platform of reform and transparency. They revised the complaint process to require written documentation, implemented checks and balances to prevent any single board member from wielding too much power, and created an appeals process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. I was even asked to join the new board, but I politely declined. I had spent enough time dealing with HOA drama to last a lifetime. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house, do my work, and maybe actually get to know my neighbors without the specter of false accusations hanging over everything. Patricia herself became something of a pariah in the neighborhood. I would occasionally see her at the grocery store or driving past, but we never spoke. She looked older, more worn down. Part of me felt bad for her. $400,000 was a life-changing amount of money to lose. But then, I remembered the deliberate, systematic way she had tried to destroy my reputation, and my sympathy evaporated. She had made her choices. These were the consequences. Sarah Chen became a friend beyond just being my attorney. We would occasionally meet for lunch or coffee, and she would update me on other HOA cases she was working on. Apparently, my case had indeed opened the floodgates. She was getting calls from people all over North Carolina dealing with similar situations. You know what the worst part is? Sarah said during one of our lunches, HOAs serve a legitimate purpose. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards that protect property values and create a sense of community. But when someone like Patricia gets power, they turn something good into a weapon. And because HOAs are so often run by volunteers with no oversight, there is nothing to stop them until it gets to the point where legal action is necessary. "You think my case will change anything long-term?" I asked. "I think it already has." The HOA industry in North Carolina is paying attention. I know of at least 3 major HOA management companies that have revised their training programs to include ethics and legal liability components directly because of your case. It is not going to solve everything, but it is a start. About 6 months after the trial, I received a check for $400,000 minus attorney fees and costs. My net was around $250,000. It was a substantial amount of money, but honestly, no amount could fully compensate for what I had been through. The stress, the anxiety, the damage to my reputation, the year of my life consumed by this nightmare, none of that could be fixed with money. I used part of the settlement to take a long vacation. I went to Colorado and spent 2 weeks hiking in the mountains, completely disconnected from emails and phones and neighbors and HOA drama. It was exactly what I needed. The distance and perspective helped me process everything that had happened and reminded me that there was a whole world beyond Meadowbrook Hills. When I returned, I felt more settled. The house that had felt like a battleground started to feel like home again. I repainted my home office, upgraded my computer setup, and even planted some flowers in the front yard, something I had been too anxious to do during the height of the conflict with Patricia. One evening, about 8 months after the trial, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Robert, the former HOA board member who had testified honestly during the trial. "Robert, hi, what can I do for you?" He looked uncomfortable. "Cameron, I wanted to come by in person to apologize. I have been thinking about this for months and I should have come sooner. I was on that board. I knew Patricia was overstepping. I had doubts about her accusations against you, but I did not push back hard enough. I let her operate without accountability because it was easier than confronting her. I failed you and I failed this community. I am sorry." His sincerity was evident. I invited him in and we talked for over an hour. Robert explained that Patricia had dominated the board for years, and most members had learned it was easier to go along with her than to challenge her. He admitted that was cowardice on their part. "You did the right thing by fighting back," Robert said. "And your case has changed how this HOA operates. The new board takes their responsibilities seriously. They understand that they serve the homeowners, not the other way around. That is because of you." After Robert left, I felt another layer of closure. The people who had enabled Patricia were acknowledging their role and trying to do better. That mattered. As the 1-year anniversary of the trial verdict approached, the Charlotte Observer reached out to do a follow-up story. I was hesitant at first, but Sarah encouraged me to do it. "Your story matters, Cameron. People need to know that they have rights, even against their HOAs, and HOA boards need to know that they can be held accountable." I agreed to the interview. The reporter, a woman named Lisa, was thorough and thoughtful. She interviewed me, Sarah, several neighbors, and even attempted to reach Patricia, though Patricia declined to comment. The resulting article was published on the front page of the local section under the headline, "Homeowners $400K Victory Over HOA Sparks Reform Movement." The article detailed my case, but also explored the broader issue of HOA overreach and abuse. It included interviews with other homeowners who had faced similar situations and quoted legal experts about the need for better HOA governance and accountability. My story became part of a larger conversation about how these organizations function and how to protect homeowners from bad actors. The article generated a lot of response. I received dozens of emails from people thanking me for speaking out, sharing their own HOA horror stories, and asking for advice. I tried to respond to as many as I could, usually pointing them toward attorneys like Sarah who specialized in these cases. One email stood out. It was from a state legislator who said she was introducing a bill to reform HOA governance in North Carolina. The bill would require HOAs to follow basic due process procedures before fining homeowners, create an accessible appeals process, require transparency in board decisions, and establish penalties for board members who abuse their authority. She asked if I would be willing to testify before a committee if the bill moved forward. I said yes. If there was a chance to prevent other people from going through what I had experienced, I wanted to be part of it. 3 months later, I found myself in the North Carolina State Legislature building in Raleigh, sitting at a table in front of a committee of legislators. I was nervous, but I had prepared my testimony carefully with Sarah's help. I told my story concisely, focusing on the key facts: the false accusations, the lack of due process, the spreading of defamatory rumors, and the abuse of power by someone in a position of authority. I explained how the existing system had failed to protect me, and how only expensive litigation had finally resolved the situation. Most people cannot afford to hire an attorney and spend a year fighting an HOA in court, I told the committee. The current system gives HOA boards enormous power with virtually no accountability. That needs to change. Basic protections like requiring evidence before levying fines, providing clear appeals processes, and holding board members personally liable for malicious actions. These are not radical ideas. They are fundamental fairness. The bill did not pass that legislative session, but it generated enough support that advocates believed it would likely pass in the next session. Change was slow, but it was happening. As I drove back to Charlotte that evening, I reflected on how much my life had changed in the past 2 years. I had gone from being a quiet IT consultant who avoided conflict to someone who had stood up against injustice, won a major legal victory, and was now advocating for systemic reform. It was not a role I had ever imagined for myself, but it felt right. Back in Meadowbrook Hills, life continued. The neighborhood had moved past the drama, though my case would probably always be part of its history. I had become closer with several neighbors who had supported me through the ordeal. Tom and I started a tradition of watching Panthers games together. Dorothy Mills and I had coffee once a month, and she delighted in updating me on the new HOA board's reasonable and competent management. I even started dating someone I met through a mutual friend. Her name was Jessica Oliver, and she was a teacher at a Charlotte elementary school. When I told her about the HOA saga on our 3rd date, expecting her to think I was crazy or litigious, she instead said it was one of the bravest things she had heard someone do. People talk about standing up to bullies with kids, Jessica said. But adults need to learn that lesson too. You could have just moved or suffered in silence or let her win, but you fought back and you proved she was wrong. That takes real courage. Jessica's perspective meant a lot to me. She helped me see the experience not as something that had been done to me, but as something I had overcome. The shift in framing was surprisingly powerful. A year and a half after the trial, I received unexpected news. Patricia and her husband were selling their house and moving out of Meadowbrook Hills. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were relocating to a different state, possibly to be closer to family, but also probably to escape the stigma of what had happened. I did not feel triumphant about Patricia leaving. Mostly, I felt sad that it had ever come to this. If Patricia had just treated me fairly from the beginning, none of this would have happened. She would still be living in her house. I would have been spared a year of hell, and $400,000 would not have changed hands. But Patricia had made her choices, and these were the results. The day the moving truck came to load up Patricia's belongings, I happened to be outside watering my lawn. Patricia saw me, and for a moment our eyes met across the distance between our houses. I could not read her expression. Anger, regret, shame, maybe all of those things. Then she turned away and went back inside. I never saw Patricia Henderson again. With Patricia gone, the final chapter of the saga closed. The new HOA board was competent and fair. My reputation in the community was fully restored. My business continued to thrive. And I had a new relationship that was developing into something meaningful. Most importantly, I had learned something valuable about standing up for myself and not accepting injustice just because challenging it was difficult. Sarah had been right when she warned me that fighting back would be hard. It had been one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but it had also been worth it. 2 years after the trial, I was sitting on my back deck on a warm spring evening, beer in hand, watching the sunset. Jessica was inside making dinner, and I could hear her singing along to music in the kitchen. Life was good, really good. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from Sarah Chen, forwarding me a news article. The North Carolina legislature had passed the HOA reform bill. It would go into effect in 6 months. The email from Sarah said simply, "We did it. Your case changed the law." I read through the article, which detailed the new protections for homeowners and the accountability measures for HOA boards. My case was mentioned as one of the key incidents that had spurred the legislation. Lawmakers quoted my testimony and referenced the $400,000 judgment as evidence that the old system was broken. Jessica came outside with 2 plates of pasta. "What are you rating?" "The HOA reform bill passed, the one I testified for." "Cameron, that is amazing." She set down the plates and hugged me. "You really made a difference." "I guess I did," I said, still processing the news. As we ate dinner and watched the sun disappear below the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened since that first accusatory letter appeared on my door. The fear, the anger, the stress of the legal battle, the vindication of the verdict, and now this actual systemic change that would protect other homeowners from going through what I had experienced. Patricia Henderson had tried to destroy my reputation and drive me out of my home with lies and abuse of power. Instead, she had cost herself $400,000, lost her position, damaged her own reputation, and inadvertently sparked a reform movement that would limit the power of people like her across the entire state. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live quietly and work from home. But sometimes life forces you into situations where you have to decide whether to fight or fold. I had chosen to fight, and that decision had changed not just my life, but potentially improved the lives of thousands of other homeowners who would now have better protections. As Jessica and I finished dinner and started talking about plans for the weekend, I realized I was truly past it all. The anger had faded. The anxiety was gone. I was just a guy living in a neighborhood, doing my work, building a relationship, and occasionally mowing his lawn without worrying about HOA letters. The story of Cameron Garrett versus Patricia Henderson and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA had become part of North Carolina legal history. Law students would probably read about the case. Attorneys would cite it in future HOA disputes. Legislators had used it to craft better laws. But for me, sitting on my deck with good food and good company, it was finally just a story, a chapter of my life that had closed. The neighborhood was quiet. The evening was peaceful, and I was home, exactly where I belonged, no longer under attack and no longer afraid. Patricia Henderson had learned an expensive lesson about the consequences of defamation and abuse of power. The $400,000 judgment stood as a permanent reminder that even small-scale tyrants in positions of minor authority are not above the law. And I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it is terrifying and difficult, is always worth it. The sun had fully set now, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. Somewhere in the neighborhood, life continued as it always had, people coming home from work, kids playing, dogs barking, the ordinary rhythms of suburban existence. But now, thanks to what had happened here in Meadowbrook Hills, homeowners across North Carolina had better protections against the Patricia Hendersons of the world. That knowledge, more than the money, more than the vindication, more than anything else, made everything worthwhile. I had never wanted to be the person who took on an abusive HOA president. But I had become that person, and in doing so, I had helped make things better not just for myself, but for countless others. Sometimes justice requires ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Sometimes standing up to a bully in your own neighborhood can change laws and set precedents and make a real difference. As Jessica and I went inside and settled onto the couch to watch a movie, I felt genuinely at peace for the first time in years. The battle was over. The war was won. And life, beautiful and ordinary and peaceful, stretched out ahead of me in my home in Meadowbrook Hills, Charlotte, North Carolina, a home that was finally, truly mine without the shadow of false accusations and malicious lies hanging over it. The story could have ended differently. Patricia could have succeeded in driving me out. I could have given up and moved rather than fight. The legal system could have failed to hold her accountable. But none of those things happened. Instead, truth prevailed, justice was served, and a $400,000 judgment sent a message that echoed far beyond one suburban neighborhood. That was the real ending, not revenge, not bitterness, but positive change born from standing firm against injustice. Patricia Henderson had tried to destroy me with her lies. Instead, she had inadvertently made the world a little bit better by forcing a reckoning with the unchecked power of HOA boards. If there was any poetry in what happened, it was that, and me. I was just Cameron Garrett, IT consultant, boyfriend, neighbor, and reluctant legal reformer. Tomorrow I would work on client projects, maybe grab lunch with Jessica, definitely avoid anything related to homeowners associations. The $400,000 judgment was history. The reform bill was passed. My reputation was restored. Life, wonderfully mundane and peaceful, had returned to normal. And that, more than any dollar amount or legal victory, was the greatest triumph of all.